Hey everyone. Welcome to my presentation for this Mercury retrograde alchemy astrology summit. We're going to be talking about Orion starseeds, or as it is subtitled, How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the Duality. So first off, I want to thank Jamie for putting this event together. I'm really excited to be able to present and also to participate. There are so many presenters, and boy, we really need this information and this Gemini brain trust right now as we are coming into a Gemini eclipse season. Mercury in Gemini is about to go retrograde. So this is very timely as Jamie had said, and I am so glad that she followed her inspiration to put this together. And thank you for having me here to be able to present this material. So we're going to talk about Orion, the constellation. We're going to talk about the reference to Orion in many different ancient cultures and the mythological context for Orion, and how Orion actually is very directly connected in these ancient cultures to the Mercury archetype, the messenger, the shepherd, and the Lord of Death, right? Because all of those things seem to encompass the role of Mercury, the magician, right? So Mercury rules Gemini. Obviously, we're going to be talking primarily about the Gemini archetype, but you can't really leave out Virgo when we're talking about Mercury. And that's something that is important to keep in mind when we are talking about duality and balance, because for all of the knowledge and empirical information that we take in and we utilize and how we conceptualize the world around us, we also have to take that and apply it to our path of discipleship, whatever that means to us. But this is primarily about Orion and the Orion starseeds, because they are directly related to the Gemini archetype and what there is to learn from these starseeds and the innate frequency that they hold from their lifetimes in those star systems that are, embodied in the Orion constellation. So we're going to talk about these ancient cultures. We're going to talk a little bit about astrophysics and, the Orion Nebula and what's going on there. And then finally, I'll give a small demonstration of how to utilize our charts to work with this starseed energy if we do indeed have it, because I am offering a free 15 minutes for anybody who's watching the presentation. So there'll be instructions available in order to receive that, to accept that offer. But I think that do we have to accept that all there is duality and separation? No, of course not. But that is part of the pathway, is to acknowledge and accept that separation has happened with the that first expression of consciousness. And Gemini archetype and the twins is really the realm of the magician, like I said, and Mercury is the magician. So the Orion starseeds, there's very specific traits that they hold that allow them to work very successfully within the spectrum of the dialectic of ideas in order to really be very clear with themselves what they want to manifest, because whatever we can conceive has its antithesis, number one, and number two, we can manifest. That is the realm of the magician. And we harness these skills, we practice these skills. Gemini in the third house is about our nervous system. It's about conceptualization, and but it's also about technical skill. It's about learning and language and taking in as much information about the world we live in as possible in order to be able to manifest. And as we're going to see in certain ancient cultures, the constellation of Orion and what it represented ultimately was inseparable from the space in which to create. And we're going to see that specifically in the Egyptian mythology. So let's get right into it. Let's start looking at Orion. We're going to start looking at the ancient cultures, work our way backwards to see how far back this interest in and reverence of Orion really goes. And then we'll go from there. So let's start looking at some cool pictures that I put together, not a PowerPoint, nothing wrong with PowerPoint. It's just, I've done plenty of those in my life, and I'd rather just look at these pictures. So let's start with the Orion constellation in and of itself. So it's very accessible. It's very visible in the night sky. In the northern hemisphere where I am, it is very visible during the winter. That is because the constellation itself is along the plane of the Milky Way, which means it's also along the plane of the ecliptic. So at the equator, it's visible all the time. And as the Earth is tilted on its axis, when we are tilted away from the sun in wintertime in the northern hemisphere, this is where we get a really good view of Orion from where we are on Earth. So we can see here all the major stars. Here is the belt of Orion, Rigel right here, Saiph right here, Betelgeuse, a massive giant star. That's very possibly in the process of dying right now. And because it's so absolutely visible, if we happen to ever be around when it finally goes, it'll supernova and turn into the biggest black hole imaginable. Here is Bellatrix, right? The Amazonian warrior, the female warrior that is represented. Here's the shield or the animal that Orion is holding. This is the club hand or the weapon. And Orion in the Greek context is a warrior. So we'll get into that in just a second. Let's start with just looking at what is in terms of an empirical, very third house type of thing. Very empirical. We see that it's very visible. So it's not a stretch to realize that or to even just consider that all of the cultures throughout history that were gazing at the night sky were going to recognize this shape and develop some sort of mythos or narrative around it. So one other thing here that's really important to consider as we are talking about Orion is this little blob right here. This is the Orion Nebula. So you can see it from here in this version. So right here in between the two legs is the Orion Nebula, and we're going to look at a really beautiful picture of it right here. So what is a nebula? It's really as simple as a cloud of dust and gas, space dust and space gas. It's the very basic constituent parts of matter, hydrogen atoms that are just bouncing around in space, and it's so cold that they're able to be in solid form. So it's dust and gas. And when light interacts from it, that's moving through space, it creates all these beautiful colors and the textures and everything. But this is an active stellar nursery. That means that stars are currently being born in the Orion Nebula. It's also visible to the naked eye. So this also was not lost on the ancients, and I'm sure it was very visible to them. Whether or not they knew what it was just by sight, who knows? But we know right now, and I suspect that the ancients knew too, because there was some communication on some level that this is where stars are born, because this is a realm of creation, right? Stars are being born. Magical creation is happening in this nebula. So how is a star born? Well, really simply what happens is that eventually all of this space, dust, and gas starts getting close enough to each other where their gravity, right, starts to pull in more density, right? It becomes more dense. It becomes more pressure. And then eventually this dust and gas gets accumulated to the point where it then activates onto a nuclear fusion system, right? That's all a star is, a nuclear fusion. Hydrogen atoms coming together, creating helium, and in the process releasing energy. This is where the energy from our sun comes from, is from this gigantic nuclear fusion process. So when a star is born, it's all of this gas and dust that starts to coalesce and coalesce and coalesce until it finally gets to this point of density and mass and pressure where it becomes a natural nuclear furnace. So this is an active process that's happening in the Orion constellation, in this nebula. So it's very likely that it's only 1,500 light years away, right? And you're like, 1,500 light years, that does seem like a long time, doesn't it? But it's really not. Not on the scale of the universe. It's actually fairly close. And what else is part of the Orion constellation? I'm going to show you real quick. In line with the belt, right down here, is Sirius. The brightest star in our sky, Sirius. It's actually a binary star. And so the smaller one is a white dwarf, which means it's a dead star. It's inert, but it's still putting off light and heat because it's just powering down basically. And then the other star, Sirius A, I believe, is right here in line with the belt. So these two aspects are inseparable in the Egyptian mythology, as we're going to see. What else we see is the nebula is right here. So it's very likely that not only was Sirius, not only were all the stars in this constellation in this basic area, not only were they likely born in this stellar nursery, it's likely that our sun and our solar system was also born in the Orion Nebula. So there is this recognition of a place of magical creation, because nothing else, there's no life without the stars being the center point of these planets that orbit around it, right? Just like our solar system. We don't exist. Life on this planet does not exist without the sun, right? And there is a habitable zone that all planets have in relation to their sun based on how much energy they're outputting. So this is really important now. And I'm going to show you that was really important thousands and thousands of years ago to our ancient ancestors. And then we're going to, see how their relationship to Orion and this concept of creation, magical creation that's happening, stars being born, and then these characters and these deities that represent messengers and the Lord, being able to steward the dead, the Lord of the dead, a shepherd of divine creation. All of these things are cross-culturally connected to Orion. It's pretty remarkable once I started really going into the historical research about all of it. And I could do so much more on this subject. It's really, this presentation will not do it the subject justice, but at the very least we're going to start getting the wheels turning around the Orion Starseeds, because the Starseed mission is really what is is really what I'm addressing, because the Starseed mission is about those who have come from these places and experience their own evolution to come back and be part of Earth's process, because we are so intimately connected, especially to Orion and to Sirius in particular. So, and the Pleiades, right? So, speaking of that, let's start working our way backwards, like I said. So first, Orion from the Greek context, okay? Let's do this. There we go. Orion was a hunter. He was a warrior in Greek mythology. You can see here again, there's Betelgeuse in the armpit. That's the club hand. This is either a shield or, a beast of some kind that the warrior has hunted. So warrior, hunter, here's the belt right here, and Rigel, the best foot forward, safe, there's dropping a knee to a certain extent. So there's that balance too between active and passive in some ways. And so much about Orion does represent this Gemini aspect, and it's going to become more apparent as we go further back. So in Greek mythology, Orion was an actual being. It was a giant. He was a giant hunter and a warrior. And what's interesting is that Orion was half immortal, right? His father's Poseidon, and then a mortal woman. And so he is a giant, and he's able to walk through the water, and his head's still sticking out. That's one of the stories that I heard. But the reason that he's immortalized as a constellation in the sky is because he had to be taken out of commission. And why is that? Well, because he was chasing the seven sisters, which is the Pleiades. And the Pleiadian constellation is right over here. Here's Taurus. So they are right next to each other, and he is facing the bull. He also has vanquished the bull as well. That's something else to consider, vanquishing some level of beast. He is a hunter. So Orion obviously is this very strong, powerful figure in the Greek mythological context, right? Their hierarchy of gods and half gods and all of that stuff is very much part of what Orion represents as well. So I'm looking at a fighter, a giant hero. There we go. So there we're talking about the Greek civilization. We're talking about the basis of our modern astrology as well, is Orion as a hunter and as a fighter and as a hero, striding man. You can think about Gemini too, like striding the gap in some ways, and fighter. That is something, keep that word in mind as we go further into the Orion starseed traits, because that concept is something that needs to be understood in its entirety to really master the Gemini energy. Because if we don't understand how to do that outside of our own emotions and desires, then we run the risk of utilizing our magical potential for our own gain, which is not of the highest light. And that's something that that's a different conversation, but that's a totally different conversation. So we're talking about Greek mythology here. So let's go back further now to Egypt, where Orion is very, very connected to ancient Egypt. So we see the pyramids on the Giza Plateau. We see that they're aligned with the stars in the belt of Orion. We also can see, when we look at this belt here, we can make some comparisons from an aerial view that the three pyramids are in line with the belt, and also the three pyramids at Teotihuacan in Mexico, right? This elusive pre-Mayan civilization that they don't really know, but has a lot of very similar characteristics to not only the Mayans, but the Aztecs as well. And we'll get into that. I'm going to show you some stuff around that too. But just to give an idea that they built their structures in alignment to the belt of Orion, which says quite a bit considering the amount of resources that it would take to build these structures and what they were for. So their alignment to this constellation and the stars in this constellation was so important to them that they put all these resources into building these huge structures in direct alignment to Orion. So we can look at this. Where did it go? Here we go. I really like this picture. It's very inspiring and it's really nice to look at. And so we know that, like I said, they put a lot of resources. It was very important. And in fact, the Great Pyramid, if you go into the King and Queen's Chamber, I'm not sure if I brought up I don't think I brought up an image to show you, but I'll just tell you that in the Great Pyramid, if you go in the King and Queen's Chamber, the King's Chamber, there's a shaft that goes out directly to Orion. The Queen's Chamber is a shaft that goes directly to Sirius, and then there's a shaft that goes directly to Alpha Draconis, okay? And so not is it just Orion that's important, but all of these stars that are also surrounding it, these really important stars, are also like directly connected to the construction of these large structures. So it's clear just from that alone that alignment astronomically was essential for whatever these structures were for, right? So what is Orion in the Egyptian, from the Egyptian cosmology? Well, Orion is Osiris, right? Orion is Osiris. So just real quick, Osiris, right? The Lord of knowledge, right? Osiris was the Lord of creation, was also the Lord of death. There's kind of like the Shiva thing going on. Osiris was inseparable from his cohort, Isis. Isis was his sister, was also his wife, represented these two polarity aspects. And what was Isis represented by? Sirius at Cancer. 14 degrees Cancer, right? What is Cancer? The womb, the space, the stabilizing core of who we each are. The permanent truth within the vast void. That is, and really the mundane made sacred. And that's, the Syrian starseeds will know all about this and what that means to them. So, but Osiris was Orion. This is the connection for the Egyptians. And these two were a big part. Isis and Osiris were the pinnacle. They were essential to the Egyptian cosmology and their whole creation myth, and their whole, the hierarchy of all of their deities and how they made sense of their reality. So Osiris was Orion. So you can see he's on a boat. There's a traveling aspect here. So keep this in mind when we start talking about Mercury. He's got the foot forward. Instead of a shield, he's holding the Ankh, which represents life or eternal life. And he's got the staff in his other hand, staff of knowledge. And he's, like I said, on a boat. There's a a traveling aspect that's important here. And like I said about the shaft in the Great Pyramid, was the king's chamber was directly connected to Osiris. So how did they practice their, how did they put these ideas and their beliefs into practice? Well, any kind of pharaoh really was going to be reincarnated into a Osiris, right? They embodied the child of Isis and Osiris, which is Horus, right? In their when they were the pharaoh or the ruler, they were embodying Horus, right? The child of the magician and the high priestess, right? Because Sirius and the moon and Cancer is represented by the high priestess, and Osiris is the magician, right? The lord of death, and the lord of creation. So you can again use your imagination to consider like what it is that the Egyptians really, what were they basing this belief on? One thing is for sure that they really valued and understood that creation came from the Orion constellation. And now that we know that the nebula is creating stars as we speak, as an active nursery, is it possible that they understood or had some sort of knowledge that they, that we came from that part of the sky because our solar system was actually created in that nebula? It's very possible. How they got that information is something I can't answer. But what I will say is that Orion as a constellation was connected to Osiris, the Lord of Death, the messenger, he's holding the Ankh of life and eternal life. And Osiris decided whether you went to Orion, right? If you went back to whence you came, or if you were being punished, right? There, as a guardian in some ways. And in Greek and Roman mythology, Mercury was the only deity to move in and out of the underworld without being trapped, the only one. In some ways was a steward of souls that have passed away if they are lost or confused or don't know how to get to the underworld. Mercury was said, and Hermes was said to be able to move into that space and out because Hermes was able to move swiftly. Not only that, Mercury and Hermes is an androgynous figure. Now this is characterized as a male figure and Isis as the female. So, but the relationship in and of itself does hold that duality within it, which is what Gemini really represents. Is the magician is able to utilize all data, all knowledge of the cosmos, and move swiftly. It's not engaged in the material. It is the conceptualization of reality and what we can create from there. So we see that Osiris is directly created to Orion. Osiris is directly connected to Mercury archetype, Gemini archetype, and how Mercury is a messenger, how Mercury travels, how Mercury is a lord of death in some ways, and how Mercury is a shepherd. And we're going to look at more. So that's ancient Egypt. Next we move to, let's see, this is well, let's look at the Babylonians first because they came next. So here is Sahu. This is the Babylonian version of Orion. Same thing. He's got the foot forward. This time the staff is in the same hand and he's turned around and he's got this bird companion with him. It's sometimes considered a rooster. And it's the same types. It's the same types of characterizations, right? This is from the Babylonian star catalog, right? The constellation of Orion was the true shepherd of Anu, right? The true creator god Anu, Anunnaki, right? Because and his goddess Ishtar or Inanna, right, is the connection to Sirius or to Isis in the Egyptian pantheon. So we see in Mesopotamia and Babylon, this is also like 2300 BC. And then we're looking at Egypt, which is like no later than 3500 BC. These two aspects very similar in terms of what they represent. In direct relation to the Orion constellation. And again, on a boat, right, has a staff of knowledge. This one has a cone head, and we've seen that if you're into the ancient astronaut or ancient alien type of thing, right? Or the in terms of archaeology and anthropology, like with the skull elongation, we see in the Babylonian characterization of the Orion constellation, the shepherd of Anu, the messenger, also characterized in Babylonian. He's got the cone head, and their star catalogs are comprehensive. The Babylonian star catalogs in cuneiform are very comprehensive. So we're looking at over and over these ancient characterizations of Orion as a constellation related to Mercury, related to Gemini, related to Messenger, related to Lord of Death. Okay, so there is an example of one of the oldest, let's find it here, Nabta-Playa. So if you are familiar with this, Nabta-Playa, this is south of Cairo. This is a very ancient Egyptian archaeological site, this stone circle. And they date this back to like 7,500 BC. And as you see, it is not only still there, it is also it's constructed in alignment with the Orion constellation. And what this does in particular is the way that it's constructed allows light in from a certain location at the summer solstice. So it's a calendar circle basically, but it's aligned with Orion. So, and like I said, 7,500 BC. Okay, this is way older than Egypt as a civilization, way older than the Sumerians and the Mesopotamians, and this is very prehistoric. But they lined this right up to Orion again. So you see how far back. Now, if we move to this continent, we're going to see one more example. So the Hopi Mesas. So we're familiar with the Hopi. We're looking at northern Arizona. These are indigenous North American peoples, and their mesas, right? Now we're looking at much, much later than Egyptian and Sumerian. And we're going to see that in Mexico too. Teotihuacan is definitely much closer to the BC AD changeover. And the Hopi as well. It took them, so they've moved and they settled on these mesas, first mesa, second mesa, third mesa, right on the belt. And then they moved in response to instruction that they were receiving from a specific creator god named Masao. So it took many centuries for them to get to all of these locations and to make their entire civilization in the shape of the Orion constellation. So Masao is the creator god that directed the Hopi. And there's a whole, set of stories and creator mythologies that go along with all of this that I'm not going to get into now. I'm just trying to show here how these cross-cultural historical connections to Orion and the archetype of the messenger, the archetype of the Lord of Death, and Mercury and Gemini are all coming together, and how it's been really almost embedded into our genetic memory as human beings. So here's the Hopi Mesas and the Hopi settlements. Either they're still lived in or abandoned in exact shape. Okay, so we want to look at Masao. This is the god, the creator god, that the Hopi got their instructions from and who said will return. That's the other thing too. All of these individual examples of the Orion constellation relating to some type of deity or messenger or god, they all say they're going to return at some point, right? And so Masao, this is the doll of the Hopi and Lord of Death. And what did he teach the Hopi? Like very simple ways to live, right, in harmony, how to farm and the natural cycles. But they do call him Skeleton Man and the Lord of Death. And so again, we see this connection to this teacher, this messenger, somebody that comes from the stars, from this place of Orion, and then also is teaching the secrets, of life and death, and not even a secret, just how to live in harmony with the duality of life and death, and promises to return. And I mean, this is really wrapped up in the Hopi prophecy that is not it's not something we can go into right now, but what I'm sharing with you is, again, like across the oceans, different continents, different people, different time frames. It all comes back to Orion and these connections. Okay, so let's see, what else do I have to show you? Oh, and one more. I showed you the pyramid belt, right? And we see the pyramids of Teotihuacan, the pyramid of the sun, the pyramid of the moon, and the pyramid of the serpent. So these particular pyramids, it's still kind of unclear who created them. We're looking at Mesoamerica, Mexico, we're looking just pre-Mayan, but there's a lot of similarities here between the Mayan and the Aztecs, so it's probably the precursor to those civilizations. But this was an urban complex where these all were. And I mean, you can easily look up these pyramids on Google or any search engine to see images of the pyramids from the ground. This is just to show you the alignment as well. So what else is here? Well, on the Great Pyramid, we have we have a character, right? That is the plumed serpent, isn't it? It is, in the Aztecs, they called him Quetzalcoatl. The Mayans called him Kukulkan. And there is, the statues, on the pyramids at Teotihuacan, and especially at the Pyramid of the Serpent, because in a way that the sun shines on the pyramid at certain times, kind of highlights a mosaic of the serpent moving down the pyramid. I haven't seen it like in person. I've only seen a video of it, and it's pretty remarkable. But again, the feathered serpent, let's talk about that, because again, a messenger, right? Moving, a messenger, a type of deity, a creator god that's also a destroyer, who's bringing a message, who is an intermediary with the creator source, right? And is, the feathered part is about the movement, the wings, the transmission, and then the serpent, it reminds me of the caduceus, this serpent energy. And again, this character, whether it's Mayan or Aztec, or even before that, it represents a messenger that has come once and will return again, and is related to the process of life and death, and is able to move through these worlds. So you see now how much Orion is connected to all of these ancient cultures. And we're talking about the Orion Nebula still creating stars, which are the basis for life in this universe. They are not the creative force in and of themselves, but they are what allows for life to develop in this universe. So we're seeing now that there is a really strong connection in our species history, our civilized history, of Orion as a representation of some type of messenger and some type of shepherd of the creative source, and the being able to move back and forth into the underworld and back out as a lord of death and as a shepherd and a steward into these spaces. So what does this mean for the Orion Starseed trait that we are really expanding on? This is really the focus. And why do we love to, learn to love the duality? Well, here are a couple traits that the Orion Starseeds in particular seem to hold, because that they understand. They come from a place of magical creation with this Orion Nebula. There is an understanding that duality is really just an opportunity to practice your skill set, right? That third house Gemini type of archetype is, rote repetition is how you master your technical skill. You practice, you learn by memorizing things, right? That left brain is a big part of the third house, whereas the ninth house is way more of the right brain. And you do need both of them together for the alchemical process that, we're talking about. But with Gemini and with Mercury, it's about being the magician, not necessarily the alchemist, because that takes a different skill set and that right holistic brain to really abstract and then transfer that entire body of wisdom that we acquired with the Gemini archetype. So Mercury is truly the magician, able to move swiftly between thesis and antithesis, right? Light and dark, positive and negative, realizing that separation is what motivates us to unify. And that's how we create something new in all ways, physically and materially, through procreation, with ideas, emotions, all of it, spiritually even. When we realize we desire so much to merge back with source, but it's every experience of separation that we go through that reinforces it over and over and over until there's nothing left except to come back into unification. Now with the North Node in Gemini and all its Gemini energy, and tomorrow the sun moving into Gemini, it's really essential. Not to mention the eclipse cycle and Mercury retrograde in Gemini. It's really essential that we understand this archetype and how to work with it, because when we don't, then we can conceive of anything. We can manifest anything that we can conceive, but it is essential that we are very clear on what it is that we are attempting to manifest, and that we've gotten all manner of information first. And this is where the Orion starseeds are really able to assist and be an example, because Orion starseeds, number one, they do not tend to, there's a strong thirst for knowledge, right? Accumulating as much knowledge as you can. This is empirical study, right? Learning things, reading things, as much as you can take in. This is what the Orion starseeds do. And not only that, but it's not about just their position. Orion starseeds are masterful at learning their position, the opposite position, and every possibility in between. This is what they are able to really execute, because they've learned to like it, because they come from this place of magical creation. And so being able to engage with the entire realm of ideas makes you that much better at what you're going to do. So Orion starseeds, they hold their opinions very strongly. You need to present very quantitative proof to get an Orion starseed to change their mind, because they have learned everything about this subject and are intent on winning. Right? It's a very competitive type of archetype because of the duality nature that we accept as part of the process of creation. And so you learn to love your competition as much as you work to win the competition, because you realize that is what is opposite of you is really just a mirror image of yourself, and that dynamic exists throughout the whole universe. So the Orion starseeds are able to really get into this space without being emotionally triggered as easily. Now, the weaker emotional body, I hate to say that, but it's you're just much more in the more masculine frequency when Mercury is in Gemini versus Virgo, is that you are kind of emotionally cold at times. Orion starseeds will kind of forget about people's feelings when they're imparting information or wisdom or getting into a debate, because it's really just about the debate, not about how they feel about the debate. And this is how we have to master this energy in order to create as creators, as magicians, because if we get pulled in emotionally to these things, we do end up manifesting from that place. And it's essential that we understand how to get into the realm of ideas without identifying with them. They're just ideas. They're just concepts. It's our way of making sense of the universe, but it's not the universe and it's not us. It's our mental process. So what else can Orion starseeds do? They need to be alone to recharge, because everything about what they're doing requires something else to engage with. It requires an opponent in some way, shape, or form, even if it's an idea. to recharge the Orion starseeds, they need to step back from that entirely and be on their own in order to recharge. Okay, that's really, really important to consider. But they love the duality, and it is what makes them better at what they do. I mean, there is a constant move towards perfection. Because that is how you master a skill, as you keep going towards that. And the competition is what motivates you to do it. So you can see how that fighter aspect as Orion, as a hunter and a hero, actually does make a lot of sense when you think about it from a Gemini perspective of a competition, right? It's important to realize that too, that you can fight without necessarily thinking of it as a fight. It's not a personal fight. It's just you're engaged in the volley back and forth between what is essentially the same thing, just opposite, without getting emotionally involved. And we really need this right now. This is where the North Node is right now. It is not, the South Node is in Sagittarius, the unification, the alchemical process, right? That is the understanding of all of these concepts comes around and creates something new. And as much as we want to, and I'm going to show you in this chart, like how much that can be a struggle with the Orion nature, because the Orion starseed nature, because it's not about that. It's about the being able to operate within the mental realm of duality and dualistic ideas and what that can bring us. So let's look at a chart so I can just kind of show you what we're talking about in reality and how it can actually be of use to us in a real world sense, especially when we're talking about astrology. So let's look at this chart here. So we would... you can see how everything is on the top of the chart except for this little lonely Chiron down here. Okay, so we're just going to look at the Orion nature that is coming out in this chart. So the first thing that I would see is that the fifth house cusp is in conjunction to Rigel, and that would mean it's in conjunction to the Orion constellation, a star in the Orion constellation, giving it a marking for Orion starseed nature. So this is in conjunction, fifth house, about what we're passionate about, our creative self-expression. So this individual, the essence of the area of the life where they are the most creative and expressive in who they are is very much about being Orion starseed, right? It's in the expression, it's the learning and expression of knowledge, especially if we're looking at the second half of Gemini. And Rigel is putting your best foot forward. It's expression, right? It's going forward and putting it out there. And so this individual is going to best express themselves. This is their natal chart, through this Orion starseed nature, which is expressive, communicative, almost proselytizing in some ways, but it's not to be taken personally. It's not meant to do anything but to express what has been discovered. Discovery is a big part of the Gemini archetype and the third house, because the third house is how we conceive of reality. And part of that is exploring it and discovering what's right around us. And our consciousness develops as a result of that. So, but what we do see here, now when we have marks in the chart that are in opposition to these starseed markings, it doesn't mean that they're not there. It just means when these aspects of our ego consciousness in this lifetime, right? This natal chart is a blueprint of us at the moment we are born. When you have stuff that's opposite of these starseed markings, it shows that there is going to be some tension with the expression of those traits in the current individual psyche and the starseed traits that are still part of the innate frequency. And as you can see, not only do we have the 11th house cusp, which is the collective in which we realize our destiny within, it has Neptune and Mars and Mercury retrograde in its detriment in Sagittarius, all in opposition to Orion starseed marking. So this person, despite their creative expression being characterized by this Orion nature, right, to really be in the Gemini archetype, to express and to communicate and to, really very firmly and strongly express one's opinion and their perspective, right? It is as a way to learn, as a way to balance, to find balance in their consciousness. It's going to be met with a lot of resistance and tension with a lot of this other stuff. Not only the 11th house cusp, you have Neptune, right, representing the mystical and the collectively mystical experience, the great dissolver in the 11th house in Sagittarius. I mean, this person's mystical connection and their, the aspect that joins them to everybody else in a transcendent state is also in the 11th house. Mars is the warrior. So you have this like spiritual warrior aspect in Sagittarius. So it's really about the collective belief systems and the truth. And then Mercury retrograde. So already calibrated for a Mercury retrograde. So that is helpful when Mercury goes retrograde, but it's also in detriment in Sagittarius. Mercury wants to be in Gemini. It wants to have the swiftness and the ability to move seamlessly from back and forth. And Sagittarius requires a dissolution and a dissolving in order to create something new. That is the alchemical process. Those constituent parts are melted down, are blended, and created something new. Mercury does not want to do that. So you can see in this chart already, this person is already tipped backwards away from what the area of their life that is about their creative self-expression, being way more interested in the learning, the empirical nature, the expressiveness and communication, and the swiftness, the messenger aspect, that Mercury and Gemini represents, and everything here is going to be pulling on that. And so there'll be consistently, I would say a lot of struggle and maybe even some guilt when this person expresses themselves as who they are, and everything else that's pulling it away from that is like, the spiritual warrior path, along with Mercury. Mercury in the 11th house is really all the mental faculties are focused on the collective and the ideals, and intellectual company is really sought after in a Mercury in the 11th house. Everything is kind of revolving around the problem solving and conceptualizing in the collective that the individual is part of. So there, you can see right there that that's going to be a real challenge throughout the life. And so considering the fact that if we looked at the transits, all of the transits going to be in the 4th and 5th house right now, pulling all the way into the areas of the individual's character development, where they are stabilized, their own connection to the depth of who they are, and then their creative expression. And it pulls away from what feels like a mission, right? And putting all of the mental energy towards that mission. And so we would work with the rest of the chart, and we'd bring up the progressions and start to really problem solve around how to be more balanced in this way. Because the thing is, there's nothing down here, right, in the natal chart. And so there just needs to be more work when there's not as much support necessarily when things are transiting this area, whereas there's way more going on up top. And so this person is really, been the blueprint for this person is most of the energy is going to be supported and naturally anchored in their relationship to other. And so when it's time to have a relationship with the self and develop the self, especially this 5th house, there's going to be tension with that. And so we would work on that. We would look at all the other aspects that are connecting, the other starseed markings, look at what else, look at the progressions and see what's happening currently, see if there's any other factors that are causing tension or cross purposes. So that's just an example of how to bring this starseed information down to like a really accessible and, understandable set of circumstances and guidance on how to work with this energy, so it's not so heady all the time. So that's really what I have to offer for today in this presentation. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate every opportunity to be able to present material. I am live on my channel every single morning with my own transmissions and doing astrology reports. So that stuff is all accessible from my website, which you can access through the event page for the Astrology Summit. So I thank you for being here. If you want to accept the offer for a free demo reading of your starseed origins and see if Orion is making an appearance in your chart, that is something that you can do as a result of being here at this presentation. So I thank you. I thank Jamie for putting this together and providing this space where all of us can come together and to really address our own potential to be magical creators, because truly, anything we can conceive of, we can manifest. And it's important that we become masters of that realm as we move through this journey together. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of the summit, and hopefully I will be meeting some of you sooner than later. Bye.